Today, we're diving deep into the ultrastructure of our nerves. We're talking about the fundamental microscopic wiring that powers our every thought, feeling, and action. It's an incredible biological network, and we're going to break it down. So, have you ever really stopped to think about it? How does the simple decision to wiggle your toes travel all the way from your brain, down your spine, and out to your foot in like a fraction of a second? It feels instantaneous, almost like magic, but it's not magic. It's just some of the most elegant biology you'll ever see. That signal is basically zipping down a microscopic superhighway. It's this incredible chain reaction, a message passed from cell to cell at lightning speed. So in this explainer, we're going to get our hands dirty and we're going to build that very highway, piece by piece, so you can see exactly how it all works. Okay, so our entire nervous system really boils down to two main types of cells. You've got the stars of the show, the neurons. These are the cells that are actually carrying and transmitting the signals. And then you have the glial cells. Think of them as the essential, unsung heroes, the support crew that holds everything together and helps the neurons do their job. So let's start by building a neuron from the ground up. I mean, if you can understand how this one fundamental unit works, you're well on your way to understanding the whole system. Every single neuron starts with the cell body. This is its mission control, its command center. Inside, you've got the nucleus, which holds all the genetic blueprints and all the machinery needed to keep the cell alive and kicking. Part of that machinery is something called Nissl substance, which are basically just tiny, hard-working protein factories, absolutely crucial for everything the neuron does. Now, sprouting out from the cell body, you see all these little branch-like things. Those are the dendrites. You can think of them as the neuron's antennas. Their job is to just listen, constantly picking up incoming signals from other neurons or even from the outside world through your senses. Okay, so once the dendrites have received enough signal and the cell body decides it's time to act, it fires off a powerful electrical pulse. We call this the action potential, and it travels down this one long, thin fiber called the axon. So while a neuron might have thousands of dendrites for listening, it usually only has one axon for talking. This is its main transmission cable. Now, to make that signal travel way, way faster, many axons are wrapped in this fatty insulating layer. This is the myelin sheath, and honestly, it's a total game changer. It works just like the rubber insulation on an electrical wire, preventing the signal from fizzling out and boosting its speed by a huge amount. And what's really interesting is that the neuron doesn't actually make its own myelin. That's a job for our support crew, the glial cells. In the central nervous system, so your brain and your spinal cord, the myelin is made by cells called oligodendrocytes. But everywhere else in your body, out in the peripheral nervous system, it's made by Schwann cells. So you've got two different types of cells doing the exact same vital job, just in different parts of the body. So we follow the axon all the way to its very end, and we find the axon terminals. This is the handoff point. The electrical signal arrives here and triggers the release of these little chemical messengers called neurotransmitters. These chemicals then float across a tiny gap and activate the next cell in the chain. And, this whole process uses a ton of energy, which is why these terminals are just packed with mitochondria, the cell's little power plants. Right, so we've successfully built a single neuron. But, of course, in our bodies, these tiny little threads are never just floating around by themselves. They're bundled together, organized into the structures we actually call nerves. It's a lot like how thousands of tiny copper wires are bundled together to create one powerful electrical cable. And this bundling is super organized. It happens in layers. First, each individual axon gets its own delicate little wrapping called the endoneurium. Then, groups of these wrapped axons are bundled together into something called a fascicle, which is then wrapped by the perineurium. And finally, all of those fascicles are bundled up and protected by a really tough outer layer called the epineurium. That whole bundle is what makes up a nerve. It's a brilliant design for both organization and protection. Now, it's really important to know that not all neurons are created equal. They don't all look the same or do the same thing. They're actually highly specialized for their specific jobs, and we can sort them into different categories based on their structure, their shape, and their function, what they actually do. So, structurally, their shape is perfectly suited for their role. For instance, you have multipolar neurons, which control our muscles. They have tons and tons of dendrites, so they can receive a lot of input signals at once. But then you have something like a bipolar neuron, which you find in the retina of your eye. It handles very specific visual data, so it has a much simpler setup, just one main dendrite and one axon. It's a perfect case of form following function. Functionally, things are a little more straightforward. You have sensory neurons, also called afferent neurons, that carry signals towards the central nervous system. Think about the feeling of touching a hot stove. That's a sensory signal. Then you have motor neurons, or efferent neurons, which carry commands away from the central nervous system, like the signal telling your muscles to pull your hand back. And connecting them in the middle, you've got intermediate neurons that act as relay stations inside the brain and spinal cord. So we have this absolutely incredible, complex, and super efficient system of communication. It's fast, it's precise, but it's also incredibly delicate. So what happens when it breaks? What happens when these vital messengers get damaged? Well, when this intricate wiring gets damaged, the results can be devastating. A broken connection in your nervous system isn't like having a bad cell signal. It can fundamentally change how a person experiences and interacts with the world around them. A perfect example is multiple sclerosis, or MS. This is a disease that directly attacks that myelin sheath we talked about earlier, specifically in the central nervous system. So remember those oligodendrocytes? In MS, either they stop working correctly, or even worse, the body's own immune system starts attacking the myelin they produce. Without that critical insulation, the nerve signals get scrambled, they short circuit, and that can lead to a huge range of problems, affecting everything from your vision to your ability to walk.
Another absolutely devastating example is motor neuron disease, which you might know as ALS. In this case, the problem isn't the insulation, it's the neurons themselves, specifically the motor neurons that control our muscles. They just progressively break down and die. The disease usually starts out in the peripheral nerves and then works its way inward, leading to a complete loss of voluntary muscle control.
And the prognosis is just heartbreaking. For a disease that systematically destroys the body's messengers, the outcome is nearly always fatal. The median survival time after diagnosis is only 3 to 5 years. It's just a brutal reminder of how incredibly essential these tiny cells are for our survival. So, from a fleeting thought to every breath we take, our entire experience of reality, everything that makes us us, is conducted along these microscopic, incredibly delicate threads. Understanding this network isn't just about anatomy, it's about understanding the very foundation of what it means to be alive.